around gender equity, climate, and food security. Just a few small things for us to tackle in this world. And 3 incredible women who are going to speak to us about it today. These are pretty huge topics. They're intertwined with one another. And we know that the Global South has been bearing the burden for the climate change and climate crisis that largely the Global North has been creating. We also know that women have been bearing the burden for a lot of the challenges that we see around the world. During COVID, the economic crisis most disproportionately affected women in the Global South. Inflation as well, and now the war in Ukraine. Over and over and over again, women are disproportionately bearing the burden. And also, there's incredible brilliance that is on this continent about bringing out new solutions and ways to govern and create in this world anew that can be more inclusive and better for all. We're going to hear from 3 incredible people today. We have first up, Doreen Deshambandi, Chief of Staff and Director of Government Relations at One Acre Fund. Give her a round of applause. Thanks, Doreen, for being with us. Njoki Jehu, UAF Africa Board Chair. Give her a warm welcome. Welcome, welcome. And Claudia Ukono, Community Engagement Lead at the World Economic Forum. Thanks. All right, let's get into this. We decided in our discussion together before this panel that we would lean into maybe however controversial we wanted to get. So please bear with us. And if anybody has any problems, bring those problems to me and not the panelists. But I will ask each one of you, maybe starting with Doreen, to introduce yourselves briefly and your work, and then we'll get into some of the spicier questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Sasha. I'll assume everyone can hear me, right? My name's Doreen. I work with a social enterprise, a nonprofit called One Acre Fund. We operate across 8 markets, and we primarily focus on smallholder farmers. So One Acre Fund has designed a program that actually structurally addresses a lot of the barriers that women farmers face in access to financing, access to extension services, access to markets, and also last mile delivery. What we understand is that agriculture progress has not always been gender equitable in other countries. So for us, we do see an opportunity to help shape an agriculture system that is pro-poor, because majority of the farmers that we are working with are still living in extreme poverty. A system that is pro-women, because we see an opportunity to actually level the playing field for women farmers. Thank you.
I think we should applaud Doreen. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Njoki Jehu. I'm here as board chair of the Urgent Action Fund Africa, which is a feminist, Pan-African, rapid response grant-making organization that supports, defends, and protects and ensures the safety of African women human rights defenders across the African continent. I do want also to say that I work with the Fight Inequality Alliance, which is a broad-based and diverse alliance working to challenge inequality, especially in structural ways around tax policy, gender, climate, etc. And we work in 35 countries around the world, strongest presence in the African continent as it should be. Thank you.
Yes, it's working. We just got a tutorial on this, so I should know how to work the microphone. Hello, everyone. I'm Claudia Ucano. I'm the Community Engagement Lead at the World Economic Forum within a platform called Uplink. So we focus on creating an entrepreneur movement at scale, and we do that by partnering with visionary organizations, leaders, philanthropists, to really invest into entrepreneurs on the ground. So of course, usually a lot of the focus for entrepreneurship goes to those in Silicon Valley, but our efforts really focus on those in the Global South, with our largest cohort of entrepreneurs actually coming from the continent of Africa, which we're super proud of.
All right, we're going to do a little bit of stage setting, so talking about the research, where things stand, and then we're going to go into what practically is happening that can work to transform gender equity in the world. And so, Njoki, I'm going to hand it to you to talk to us about the research on climate, because you've got such a beautiful take on this.
As was mentioned, the climate and food crisis are interlinked. The three of them met without me because I had something else, and when I came, they had reached the same conclusion that I had, which was that actually this two-day conference could have only been spent on the question of the food crisis and the climate crisis. So obviously it's very huge, or these issues are very huge. And the research that I'm going to refer to was the 2020 State of Climate Africa report, which found that while Africa is only responsible for 4% of the greenhouse gas emissions, the rise in global climate, the sharpest pain of the climate crisis is being felt on the African continent. So in the last 5 years, we have seen the rise in the water levels in the Congo River Basin. We have seen floods in East Africa that have devastated millions of lives and led to thousands of loss in the loss of life. We have seen cyclones in Mozambique and Mauritius and Somalia, places that in the past were not where cyclones were found. We saw extreme rainfall in Algeria and Morocco, that all of this in the last 5 years that devastated in the infrastructure. There are estimates that probably by 2050, there will be no glaciers on the African continent because the glaciers on the Ruwenzori, on Kilimanjaro, and on Mount Kenya are melting. So this is the reality and the findings of the research, and that the climate crisis is a unique driver and multiplier of inequality. And when we look at the African continent and understand that our agriculture is rain-fed, then you can see this very, very close link between the crisis in food and in climate. And as we are talking about women and gender issues, actually women lead on food production and many other things that have to do with agriculture and food production, and I'll let you take it up from there.
Yeah, and I think to step back a little bit, we actually had a conversation around, are women vulnerable? And collectively, everyone here said we can't attach that word to women. But we also collectively agreed that women do sit in a very vulnerable place right now, and it's important that we recognize that. On the food security side, currently women yield 15 to 25% less than men per acre, and that's driven by a 10% difference in access to things like seed, participation in cooperatives, financing, or even simply having a bank account. Women are receiving about 20% less financing than men. They're receiving 20% less access to extension services. I was looking at the numbers for Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda. Land managed by women is 18, 26, and about 30% less productive than land managed by men. And when women have access to land, it is of poor quality. So it becomes really difficult when we're having conversations around food security and climate resilience if those conversations are not gendered, because the problem certainly is gendered. Currently, the World Bank projects that by 2030, 9 out of 10 of the world's most extreme poor is going to live in sub-Saharan Africa. The majority are going to live in rural areas where farming predominates, and that poverty is going to be disproportionately women. So I think setting the stage and understanding the context of what we're talking about today, we have to think about the gendered perspective of this problem. On the flip side, As we're preparing for this, I thought about two women in our program. One of them, her name's Jessica. She was enrolled in a program in Uganda. She joined, tripled her harvests, was able to start a thriving poultry farm, supported 10 children, and sent 2 of her kids to university. In Bugesera, not too far away from here, we have another farmer in a program. Her name's Angelique. Angelique is a mother of 5. Also similarly joined One Acre Fund, tripled her maize and bean yields within 3 years, and was doing quite well. In 2021, she shared with us that she planted 30 acres of maize and beans, but just as they were sprouting, they all died because of severe drought. And she mentioned that her and other women farmers in her community are facing drought at very unprecedented levels. So this is not a nice conversation where we come and talk about the gendered perspective of climate change and food security. This is an imperative. If all of us in this room are committed to actually making any progress on one, addressing issues around extreme global poverty and issues around climate change impact, we can't have those conversations and leave out the majority of the people affected, because that's women farmers. Thank you.
Thank you both for setting the very sobering stage of the reality of climate and the impact on this continent, and especially on women. And we should maybe just do a round of applause for all the farmers in Rwanda and on the continent as well.
Sasha, the thing that I do want to say, it refers to something that you have said about the prediction by the World Bank. But we are here, and there are millions of African women on so many levels, in so many sectors, and in so many different terrains that are fighting day and night. Mm-hmm. So the last word is not the word by the World Bank about what is going to happen to African women. We have the last word because of the work that we are doing, because of the agency and the commitment and the solutions and alternatives that African women have in climate, in agriculture, in health, in education. And we should not forget this. Yes. Let them not tell us how we are going to die. We will tell them how we are going to live.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we are going to come back to talk about some of the structural issues and barriers and how we can open up, make it easier for these brilliant solutions to come about and thrive. But first, Claudia, I'm going to ask you about this. Claudia supports incredible entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa and around the world, and on both climate and food security. And there's often this discussion on, all the new innovations must be helping people gain food security, but also make sure that we're not destroying the environment in the meantime. And coming from a Western perspective, sometimes that can seem a little bit challenging when the West has, used the resources of the global South, stolen those resources to fuel its own economy to get to food security while destroying the environment. And now are we putting too much pressure on asking for everything from these entrepreneurs? Talk to us a little bit about that.
No, it's a good point. And I do agree with the point that, yes, all of the pressure is now being put on the global South when we are not the ones who have actually created this problem. But at the same time, sort of goes to what Njoki said about we're not going to allow them to tell us how we're going to die. In fact, like Africans, we're going to tell the world how we're actually going to overcome the problems that they themselves have created, and that's exactly what we're seeing with these entrepreneurs. If we take the lens of climate change, only 9% of the innovations that are being developed around climate mitigation are coming from women. That's globally. If we then apply the African lens to that number decreases significantly. So I think the question is also like, how can we also empower more women to create those solutions? One of the conversations that we had before this was also about like listening to these women who are on the ground who are actually facing these problems, right? Like, yes, we have these conferences which are great. Yes, we have organizations like the World Bank that put out all of this data, but they're not the ones, and we're not the ones who are actually in these fields experiencing these things ourselves. So I think also like taking that into consideration is really important.
And to build off of that, there's the question of engagement, right? Who's engaged in making what types of decisions? And I'd love for each one of you to touch on what women are engaged in what decisions and where should they be engaged in leading decisions that maybe they aren't always today. And Doreen, I'll start with you and maybe we can go down the line if you don't mind.
I think living in Rwanda, I sit in a pretty special place and a place of privilege in that the government has actually championed quite I would say very sector-leading changes in terms of women's participation. We see that at the government level, we see that at the policy level. Where we see, particularly in agriculture, where we see the crux of the problem and the place that's most difficult is at the household level. A lot of the issues, if we're talking about something like climate change, right? A lot of women that we're working with, a lot of the women farmers within their households, they're not able to drive independent decisions, for example, around reinvestment of marginal profits from their farms. So on our side, we can talk about all the things that we are doing on crop diversification, soil fertility, and increased assets for women. But then are we looking deep enough to make sure that those women are able to go to their households and drive those decisions? We're not saying that women are not empowered, but I think even with all the work we've done, and we have pretty strong M&E data, for example, within One Acre Fund that shows that there is no yield difference between men and women within our programs. But when we started unpacking the assumptions that we were making and disaggregating the data around what women were experiencing, we found that story to be slightly different. And so it's easier sometimes, I think, at the policy level to say, well, let's get women into these positions of leadership. But I think what we want to do for us is make sure that at the very end, if we say that, as an example, we are connecting women to markets and increasing income diversification, we should be able to attach that to a direct outcome at the household level of what women are experiencing, because that also aggregates as you move up.
Thank you for going that extra step and sharing not just what's been working, but also how we can go even further, and looking at that data at the household level to see are women in control of the decisions that they ought to be at the household level and not just at the business level. So thank you for being brave enough to share that with us. Joki.
One of the things that is true is that even though women have knowledge, they have skills, they have agency, they are excluded from decision making on climate, on agriculture, on health, and on education. And we then get to see how this plays out when at the same time women are expected to meet governments, to meet UN agencies, to meet communities and families, and even countries and continents in terms of providing and bridging the gaps that exist. African women have agency, they have knowledge, they have skills, but often we find ourselves in situations where all of these things get projected on us, and that the colonial histories, the neoliberal economic models, the politics and the histories of extraction, ongoing, past, present, and ongoing at this very moment, are also acting up on our lives. That the patriarchal logic that says that a woman can till the land but has no control over that land, that she can plant, tend, and harvest, and at the point of sale, her husband or male relative will come and say, this belongs to me because the land was mine, when they didn't work a single day, and that logic is upheld. These are the things that really assault the lives of women. And in feminist discourse, we talk about the intersectional nature of our lives, that I'm not here, over here, I am dealing with exploitation and oppression because I'm a woman, I'm a black woman, I'm a poor woman, and all of those things act out on my body, on my livelihood, on my agency, etc., etc. And if we are not recognizing this intersectional nature of that, if we are not engaging women in decision making, in priority spending, priority setting, in decisions about spending, whether as a family or as a country, in how where the money is spent, then we are failing not just half of our community or half of our population. We are generally failing the entire country. We are failing the people and the planet. and we need to interrogate how, what are the ways in which then women are brought in, not in sort of token ways, not in talks, bean counting ways, but in ways that are meaningful and that value women and what they bring and what they contribute. We are not going to get women from underneath oppression by always considering them as markets, as producers, thinking of them as entrepreneurs, as the way that women are going to get up from underneath economic oppression and social oppression and all the rest. We have to really think about the whole realm of realities that women have to deal with, even as they are handicapped or even have their two hands tied behind their backs and expected to deliver on so many fronts.
Thank you. And yes, building on many of these levels that you have both touched on now, right? At the household level, at the community level, at the national level, and we also have the global level. And Claudia, you are working at the World Economic Forum. How are decisions made at the global level, and what decision-making authority should which woman hold at that global level? How do we bridge this?
That's a big question. Sorry, can you repeat the question one more time?
So how, at the global level, and thinking even about the World Economic Forum, who's sitting making decisions in those rooms, and who should be sitting and having the decision-making authority in those rooms?
I'm going to say something that's maybe a little bit controversial, and something that I think at the World Economic Forum we're actively working on as well. We do have a board that's made up majority of men. However, there are women that are sort of taking strides in that space to take up space and make sure that their voice is actually heard. So I think from that perspective, we are making strides. On top of that, some of the sort of additional platforms that we have within the forum, so focus specifically on gender and economic empowerment. So a lot of these initiatives are helping to bring in those male allies to the table to say, okay, who in your organization can actually be the voice for women at your organization? So making sure that, yes, like women's voices are important, but I think it's been sort of a common thread that we need those male allies because they're the ones taking up the space right now, right? So we need them to also shift their mindsets to be more sort of open to including us in those conversations.
Very realistic take here. Thank you
You're welcome.
for shedding some light on this.
Slightly controversial. Hopefully I keep my job.
I think when we're discussing decision-making authority too, we often see, like, there's not always so many metrics even to describe this, right? Are women in the room? Are they speaking? And are their ideas winning? Right? Are those the ones that come to the forefront? And we need to be tracking all of these levels if we're really thinking about who's making the ultimate decisions that are governing our lives today and that are informing gender parity and gender equity. So thank you for shedding light on that. I think there seem to be also many things in our discussions and in a room like this where we hear lots of facts and best practices and whatnot over time. Sometimes we also believe in myths that aren't actually quite true, and I'm wondering if we could dispel a few myths here, if you each have one that you want to sort of share that you feel like we hold some assumption that's actually not a true assumption. And before I hand that to you, and maybe Joki, you can go first, and then Claudia, and then Doreen to shake up the order a little bit, we may have this question, maybe one more, and then we'll turn it over to you, so please start prepping and thinking, what question might you want to ask these three brilliant women? So I'll hand it to you first.
It's an interesting question, and as someone who believes that people learn from different things, in Kenya we have the phenomenon called the Maasai Market, and you go and there's art and there are all kinds of things. And when you look at the batiks at the Maasai Market, many of them feature what I call the African donkey woman, who is carrying on the head, on the back, this hand, and the front probably. And these are the perceptions that have some founding in reality in terms of the burdens, maybe not necessarily physical burdens that African women carry. So, I hope we are beyond and getting beyond the place where there are these people who think that they're going to come to Africa and save African women. Because really, there is a world of PhD material that African women can teach those who are coming to teach them or to save them. And I think this is one of the things that we need both to completely undo about what African women know, what African women can do or have done, and that they are capable of. The idea that there is a one, Winnie Mandela, a one, Wangari Maathai, a one, this or the other. You can think about your favorite African hero, and the perception that they are unique and they're singular, I think is one of the myths that we really need to undo. And part of that myth is also includes that African women don't understand their oppression. They don't understand what's going on. They are a blank canvas on who, all these agencies and policies and decisions get written on them, and they have nothing to do about it. And say that what we need to be doing is supporting African women in their struggles, in their efforts to have dignified livelihoods, in their efforts to educate themselves and their children, in their efforts to defend their communities. In 2019, and I think that number has now gone up, more than 240 women were killed globally fighting for land, for forests, for defending rivers and lakes. And many of them on this African continent. We are not even counting the ones who have died in defense of their homes, their bodily integrity, etc. And I think that it is important for anyone who is listening and who is thinking, including those of us in this room. I mean, if there's one thing that we at Urgent Action Fund Africa have learned, is to listen, and listen very closely, and respond as we have been instructed by the African women human rights defenders writ large, who we interact with in more than 50 African countries. Listening is something that we all need to do better, and that to understand that that will include, and I shy a little bit to say this, that many of the members of the African Philanthropy Forum are some of the ones that these women human rights defenders, these communities, are going to be confronting and engaging in struggles about their rights and violations of their rights. And we need to be listening better. Mm.
Thank you for illuminating that, and the powerful statistic about the women who have been lost fighting for the environment and for their land.
Perfect, thank you. Yes? Okay. Sort of kind of building on what she said, so, but taking the lens of entrepreneurship, one of the myths that I hear quite commonly in the space of entrepreneurship when thinking about the African continent is that the reason why there's a lack of entrepreneurship is because there's a lack of skills, which, to be very honest, makes my blood boil, because that's not the case, right? Like, I mean, if we look around, there are several entrepreneurs sitting in this room, and just from the work that we've done over the last 2 years with Uplink and at the World Economic Forum, we've been able to source, thousands of entrepreneurs coming from this very continent. So I think this sort of idea that that we need the West to come in and educate us on this continent about how to be entrepreneurs, that's not the case, right? A lot of us sitting here have the skills and the resources already. It's more about making sure that those individuals have access to funding, to key decision makers, and so that they're able to scale their operations. So yeah, I don't want to get preachy because I start to get upset.
We're here for it.
But yeah, that's the one that I would say probably boils my blood the most, and one that I want to dispel.
And do you, just to build off of that before we go to Doreen,
Sure.
There's a controversy around capacity building, right? Do you feel like women and women leaders are like disproportionately just always trying to be coached too much and get too much like capacity building time and not just enough cash to do their thing?
Yes. I think that's...
That was maybe a leading question.
No, it's okay. No, I think that's one aspect. But I think the cash aspect is very important, right? So I think how can we also like listen to the entrepreneurs, like listen to what they're actually saying, right? Yes, capacity building and coaching, but like the issues that these women are trying to solve, this is coming from their own experience. So like Njoku said, let's just listen to what they're actually saying. Like it just, yeah, I don't want to get upset, but it boils my blood how we're always trying to preach to women. Oh, let me like show you the way. Yes, it's okay to guide them, but also at the same time, like let's actually give them the money so they can actually, have some action. Like let's stop talking and let's actually make things happen.
Beautiful. Let's listen.
Yeah.
Listen more. And give some money.
I think instead of actually dispelling a myth, I would talk about some of the learning and unlearning we've had to do. And it actually resonates with what you guys are talking about, the power of listening. I think sometimes we don't even ask the question because we've already assumed we understand what the problem is. I was joking that I actually hope for a future where I get replaced on these panels so that instead of seeing me, you guys actually get to see a female farmer. You get to meet Jessica, you get to meet Angelique, and a lot of women who actually are experiencing the reality of what we're talking about. They know food security and they know climate resilience much better than I could ever speak on it. And I think coming from my perspective, well-intentioned, and we do have very positive data, but even an organization like Waneka Fund, there are certain assumptions that we've made. I'll give a practical example on extension. So we provide direct extension to farmers within a program, and we're currently serving about 1.4 million farmers across all countries, about 750,000 in Rwanda, and then through our government partnerships in Rwanda, we also reach about 1 million farmers. So extension, obviously, very critical to agriculture. We provide extension services. We never really stop to pause and think about whether the timing of our services work for women, right? The assumption is that if we're delivering this service, which we know has a high impact, then women should be able to attend and apply it. But then we actually Co-Impact, who is represented here, they pushed us really hard on evaluating our role and taking a more systems approach to how we think about how women are experiencing the things that we're doing, the services that we're providing to them. So we ran a gender audit of our program, and we already know women have a time poverty. On average, African women are spending about 5 hours of additional time in unpaid labor a day. So if we're designing an extension service, it is likely not to reach women if we're not considering the time poverty that they have, right? But what we found out in Rwanda, for example, is radio is an extremely effective channel to reach women because they can listen to extension messages without being tied to showing up at a specific place at a specific time. So for us in learning, another practical example I can think about is cell phones, right? Everyone talks about tech. Tech is sexy. Most forums like this, they'll ask you, what are you doing and what are you delivering through tech? Most of the time with the farmers we're working with, if there is a phone in the household, it belongs to the man. So if you're sending messages, whether it's on weather-related messages or market access or extension services, they're not getting to the woman. You assume they are, but they're not. So I think starting to understand some of the assumptions we're making and unpack them is also going to help us make sure that we're delivering the right services. One, really just ask women the questions because they know everything. They understand the problem much better than we all do, and then make sure we are giving them the right productivity factors, and they're going to lead a lot of the change that we're talking about.
Beautiful. And just to sort of build on what you were just saying, I think Doreen was raising some really important points around how much women are doing, right? Women are taking care of the household, they're taking care of the community, they're taking care of the economy now, we're asking them to go into government. There's so much that women are doing and taking on. Can you shed just a little bit more light on your thoughts there, on this taxation that women have to do everything?
Well, that feels more of a personal question. So maybe I might not be speaking for Waneka Fund right now. I'll put that on record. But On one hand, it feels like we're asking women for a lot, and women have this undue burden that they're taking on. On the other hand, I think we also try to limit women, and I feel that, right? Because men are allowed to show up, and the world's their oyster. They can be CEOs and fathers and entrepreneurs and anything they want on any given day, right? But when it comes to women, I think sometimes we also try to box that in. So I think there's a bit of a tension for me there, where on one hand, yes, we need to reduce that time poverty and get women away from doing all this unpaid labor. But on the other hand, like, allow women to explore, and if they want to pursue all the opportunities, allow them to be the agency, which they already have, to be able to explore that. So I'm not sure if that was the answer you're looking for.
Thank you for taking that on. And would either of you like to touch on either the sort of woman being taxed by doing everything and or structural changes and transformations that you wish to see?
Maybe I'll speak to the structural changes and with sort of a concrete example. So a lot of the work that we do is identifying those visionary organizations, philanthropists, leaders who are paving the way in particular thematic areas, so food security and climate change being one of them. And one of the examples that I want to give is for a South African woman who runs a nonprofit called Africa Teen Geek. So it focuses on STEM education for children, which I know is a slightly different topic than what we're speaking about today. But she grew up in poverty, right? And so she was able to, through lots of different means and mentors and all these different things, she was able to create this nonprofit organization to give back to the community. And now that she's become one of our partners, she's making it her mission also to sit in those rooms with those male CEOs to actually impact the change that we want to see at the policy level. So I think making more space for those type of women who have gone through those experiences and are able to speak about how they were able to overcome them will allow us to also make those structural shifts that you're talking about.
Beautiful. And maybe some calling in of the
Yes.
men that you were talking about
Yeah,
before.
definitely.
I think that one of the things that we also need to think about is in this question of how we limit women in the social and the domestic arena, and the forays that and the pathways that are open for them to then participate in the market as consumers, as producers, is very instrumentalized. So, certain cottage industries that women can go into, and that's the extent. So you have maybe dairy goats or chickens or pigs or something that is very limiting, and that even as it is discussed, doesn't, you have people who describe what they do with women and for women and projects that they're running where women, if women are listening, they can't even recognize themselves in the descriptions that are done. In Fighting Equality Alliance, we talk about Kizungu Mingi, a lot of English that people do and use to describe things and to exclude, actually, so that even the women who are engaged in these projects are excluded in being able to describe their own agency, their own role, their own contributions, because there's just too much English and they cannot participate. They're not able to participate at that level. So as we think about how we support women, one of the things I think that we need to really acknowledge is that for decades on this continent, in very specific and particular and very successful ways, big and small, there are African women institutions, communities, small groupings that have been doing what we are now, for many of us, beginning to think about doing. Right? So, and let me be very explicit and say, funding from the African Philanthropy Forum members on this continent has been Urgent Action Fund Africa, has been One Acre Fund, has been African Women's Development Fund, and on and on and on, that have been doing this work for a long time. The idea of not reinventing the wheel or beginning from zero is really an important one. So there's not so much time and wasted. There are lessons that have been learned. There's research that has been done. And as we have said again and again, listening to the women and understanding how that partnership works. That the engagement is not just about the bottom line. It's not just about the headlines. It is not just about profile of what you're doing, but it is that engagement that the work speaks for itself. You know, at the end of the day, you wouldn't need to do a shiny brochure or a big press conference to toot your own work, but that it will speak for itself.
Absolutely. There is certainly centuries of incredible work being led by women on this continent that we can all learn from and globally should be learning from and uplifting. We are going to shift to questions from you all. So please raise your hand. I see one great hand back here. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 at the same time. In the far left of the room and the far right of the room. Excellent. Let's take those 3 and see where we get. Thank you.
My name is Mary Wangoe, and I work for an organization called Refuge Point. We work with refugees and focused on finding lasting solutions for displaced communities in a dignified way. I thank you for the conversation that we've had today. I especially like the conversation on climate and how that is affecting women and children. And I'm thinking about Africa and the number of people that are currently displaced, either in their own countries or living as asylum seekers or refugees in Africa, still within our continent. And the numbers are huge. If you look at UNHCR latest statistics, I think we are at about 30 million, which is a lot of people for a continent that is still struggling with other issues that we are mentioning here. So I'm asking our panelists to speak a bit to the gender lens on these heightened vulnerabilities, you know, on these women who are displaced or who are living as refugees and who are also now facing the realities of the countries they are in, and asking what perspectives they would have to the philanthropists in the room. How do we design programs? How do we fund programs for this group that has, I think I would say, heightened vulnerabilities? And thank you, that's my question. On a light note, I liked the myths question. And as an individual, I want to share a myth that goes back to some of the wordings that we have in our African societies. I remember a few days to my wedding day, about 10 years ago, my grandma called me aside and asked me, what is the word for woman in Kikuyu, the language that I speak? It is motumia. Motumia, for those who may speak a language close to mine, means gotumia. Gotumia is to keep quiet. And the advice she gave me is, if you want to be a good wife, then you need to learn to keep quiet. My grandma is almost 90 now, and I thank God I had a chance at education, and I was able not to fit within that. But I imagine how many girls are told that, because our naming in itself dictates some of these myths. And there's a chance for us to also look at some of the things that we can begin to change as we talk to our daughters and as we look at our communities, and just a few things that may not need funding, but we can start to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. In the left-hand side of the room? Or sorry, our left-hand side? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Baina Bello from IT. I'd like to react to 2 things. Taxation, when women are, you know, we have our role as wife, as mothers and grandmothers, and et cetera, and we're being asked to do more outside. It's not a problem if we're not doing it from the individualistic, that reduced family thing that the family is just mother, father, children. Women had all kinds of roles that they played, but we had a huge family. Grandma, auntie, everybody was part of the family and helped to do the work. So it was easy for us. All the women warriors, all the women leaders had a whole family. So we need to rebuild that strong, wide, large family come out of the individualistic. Then all of this is nothing. We can rule the world. The second element I would like to, creating famine. We must realize famine begins with the decision to remove seeds from fruits and vegetables. That's the number one insurance of famine. That means after I eat, I have nothing to put in the soil, so my grandchildren, great-grandchildren will have the same fruit. So that's the number one thing we have to deal with if we want to do it. The second thing, when you plant that seedless thing into the soil, what does it do to it? We need to investigate that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. And we had another hand over here, I believe.
Thank you very much. My name is Susan Lubega. I work with the Nabagereka Najinda Women's Fund. The fund is women-led, and we're trying to systemize philanthropy. I want to start off by appreciating our speakers on the panel. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and information. I would want us, as a team, coming together under APF, to really think about being very pragmatic, especially when we talk about Africa and the role of the woman. In the African context, we need to acknowledge that culture has to a large extent contributed to that positioning. And part of addressing the issue should look at changing the mindset at that societal level. Because much as we might want to empower the woman, they are held back by these cultural norms that are not going to be addressed by education. They are not addressed by policy. We can have very good laws, we can have very good policies, and we still find that the women are not at the front because fundamentally, in the mindset, they are locked in this corner where they believe in the norms that have already been prescribed for them.
Thank you.
So,
unfortunately, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up the question because we are so time limited.
Okay, so my first question is on addressing that. The next one is on addressing the role of the men in providing the support that is required, because we need them to open their minds and to allow the women to be.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for those two questions. So we have climate displacement, women who are displaced, advice to philanthropists around this. We have around rebuilding the strength of the family unit, the community unit, seeds to keep bearing fruit, and this question around the mindset at the societal level, commenting on that and the role of men. How can we advise men and what role they can play? If you don't mind choosing one of those things that you might want to respond to, because we are running out of time, that would be wonderful. And I'll start with you, Doreen, and we'll go down. Thanks.
I'll start with the last question because this is something we're talking about, and that's why I spoke about the focus on looking at what's happening at the household level. A very practical example is we currently partner with the government of Rwanda's national extension system called Twigira Muhinzi. So Twigira Muhinzi has 14,000 extension agents reaching every single family, every single farmer in Rwanda. Currently, only about 20 to 25% of those extension agents are actually men. But we also know that when we see more numbers, increased numbers in representation and leadership, it also has a direct correlation with women's participation. So currently, some of the work we're trying to do is not going into this community and saying, oh, we need to really push on culture norms. That work is very difficult, though that's where the work around gender transformation sits. What we're trying to do is really work within the system, within the national extension system, to push the number of extension agents to up at least 50%, and then have those extension agents then start leading the work within their communities through the trainings they deliver, through the training materials that they're using within their local communities. That's an easier place to start the conversation around how are we challenging gender norms than having someone external to the community come in and start that conversation. Because as Njoki said, a lot of these things we're talking about are very well known. These are challenges that women are already contending with, and I think the role that we can play from a systems change perspective is just empowering women within their own communities to be able to take that work on.
Yes. Njoki, do you mind 30 seconds on us here?
Okay.
Thank you.
I think that there's a lot to say, but I want to say that many of these things that we are dealing with that are facing women have not happened in a vacuum. There has been a structural process that has led us to where we are. There's the language of leaving no one behind. But actually, I think by design, the policies, the priorities actually push especially women behind. So we need to understand that it is intentional. It is not a vacuum, it's not an accident, but it has happened because of policies and because of long-standing traditions, cultural and others. And once we understand that, then you can stop holding your head saying, oh my, what am I going to do? But actually addressing what we know to be the root causes.
Thank you. Claudia, take us home.
Okay, so then I'm not going to say my actual thoughts. Maybe just leave you with a little quote, maybe not a quote, but you mentioned this earlier that African women know what's best for African women. So let's allow them to take up the space they desire to take up. So I would wrap it up with that. Let's just listen more and allow them to take up the space that they desire and they deserve.
Absolutely. I have been hearing from the three of you and learning, let's listen to women on this continent. Let's respect their agency and their dignity, and let's make sure that we fuel their ambitions. Thank you three so much, and thank you all. Let's give them a round of applause. Oh, yeah, and we're also going to do that picture thing.
Thank you very much indeed for everyone. Can we please give them again a big round of applause? And give yourselves a big round of applause. You have been a wonderful, wonderful crowd, wonderful delegates, wonderful panelists, and of course, wonderful moderators. We have had many insights. Now we are going to, this is the end of this segment of day one. We're going to reconvene here at 6 sharp. We will kindly ask everyone to please, kindly, I repeat it, leave the room. It's a good time to go and refresh. Make sure that you take all your belongings with you as we need to prepare the room for what is going to come next at